This week you're going to be looking at chapter 26, which covers kind of a short time span, but there's so much that happens between 1960 and 1973. And this chapter is titled Liberalism and Its Challengers. So you're going to read a lot about JFK in this chapter, and then you will also look at Johnson after Kennedy's assassination, and then there's just tons of things happening here at home domestically and internationally during those 13 years. So you will look at the Bay of Pigs invasion and how it's this really humiliating failure for Kennedy. And it gives the Soviet Union this chance to really show, look, we do have the technology and the ability to wipe out your country if we wanted to. We've brought Cuba into our sphere of influence, and you'll notice here how close Cuba is with the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so what we were trying to do with the Bay of Pigs invasion is they were trying to use exiles from Cuba to go through Cuba and slowly get people and followers to help in this insurrection and this rebellion, and it ends up failing miserably. And these were CIA trained rebels that we were training to go in and try to take over Cuba. And this is one of those primary sources that's in there. This is Fidel Castro and, Khrushchev saying, I'm bringing you into this sphere. So this is, I guess it's a political cartoon, as you can tell, but really just showing you how close we were to another nuclear fallout and another nuclear war, kind of pushing us almost to the brink of World War III. You're going to be looking at the second wave of the feminist movement, and you're going to look at the difference between African American women and white women, primarily those two, because those are the two biggest groups that are focused on typically in history. There are movements within the Chicana community and also within the American Indian community with women, but those tend to be looking more at kind of a holistic approach for all Chicanos and all natives. But I do want you to realize that there are women in those groups that are supporting their separation as women as well. And then you've got the movement of Black Power is going to pick up some momentum. You have guys like Malcolm X who are taking a more violent approach to this and not a passive approach like Martin Luther King does. And within the Black Power movement, you're going to see the rise of the Black Panther Party. And a lot of times the Black Panther Party has a really bad reputation because they do tend to choose violence a lot of times. But one thing that's really cool and a lasting effect of the Black Panther Party is free school lunches, which that's kind of a big debate right now with this new presidential administration coming into play. Free school lunches could be on their way out, but that is one thing that they started in California was everyone deserves lunch. Everyone deserves food. And a lot of people can't afford it. And so these kids go to school all day hungry. Well, if you're hungry and you're trying to study, it's going to be really hard for you to study if you're on an empty stomach. So what they started doing are these free lunch programs, and that's almost a nationwide thing now. We'll see what happens under this administration. Hopefully it stays, they bring it back, but we'll see. But that's one cool thing that the Black Panther Party did. When you do see, after Kennedy's assassinated, we're going to see his vice president Johnson taking over. And Johnson's going to kind of follow in the footsteps of JFK and continue with civil rights acts and voting rights acts. And we will see the elimination of laws against interracial marriages. So for a lot of times in a lot of states, a Black person cannot marry a white person. And white people could not marry Mexicans. And so we're going to see the lifting of those interracial laws under what's known as the Warren Court. And that is the Supreme Court Justice. His name is Earl Warren. And he's going to be kind of the deciding factor on a lot of these. You, from being from Arizona, you probably heard of Miranda versus Arizona, your Miranda rights that are read to you while you were being placed under arrest. Those are laws that are passed under the Warren Court. We also have Vietnam. Vietnam did not start with Johnson. Johnson's going to get a really bad reputation during the Vietnam War, and that's why he's going to choose not to run for re-election when it's time for that. In Vietnam, we're going to be drawn into the Vietnam War because we were trying to stop the spread of communism. Remember, we are still in the midst of the Cold War, but this is a hot war that is happening in the Cold War, and the two major players in the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the United States, they're going to play out this hot war in Vietnam. And you've got North Vietnam, who, as you can see in this map, they are going to place their alliances with the Soviet Union and with China and with communism. And then you've got places like South Vietnam that are going to align themselves with the United States. I don't know if you guys know what happens in Vietnam. Spoiler alert, we don't win in Vietnam. There is not a North and a South Vietnam. It's all just Vietnam now. And then you also have the Berkeley Free Speech Movement. What you're going to see with the Mecha movement, the American Indian movement, the free speech movement, the bus rides, they're known as the Freedom Rides. This is all started by really young people, people that are more closely aligned to probably your age. These are college-age students that are trying to see some things happen and get things passed. And a lot of times these students will take a very passive approach, a non-violent approach. And just kind of testing the waters like they do with the Freedom Rides, just seeing, are things really, has the separate but equal been lifted? Are buses integrated where you can sit wherever you want? That's what the Freedom Rides are trying to do right across the South and test that new legislation, those new laws that have lifted the lifted segregation laws. You're also going to briefly read about the Stonewall Riots. This is like the watershed movement for the LGBT movement. We don't have all the other acronyms that go with that movement now. It was just known as the lesbian, bisexual, gay, and trans movement at the time. But you'll read about the gay liberation movement that's going to start in the late 60s and carry on through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and up into now. So at the end of reading the chapter, you should be able to do these 5 things listed here for your learning objectives. I've added in some crash course videos about the 1960s, and then I also added in a U.S. history, a crash course U.S. Black history video for you to watch. Here are all the assignments that are completed and achieved. So you've got your learning curve, you've got 2 quizzes over some primary sources, and then your map quiz. Then also this week you have an exam. So we only have 2 exams in this course. The first one covers the first half, which is chapters 24, 25, 26. This is the link to the exam. If you've never used Lockdown Browser before, you will have to use that instead of using like Safari or Google or Firefox. You're going to use Lockdown in order to locate the exam and take it in Canvas. Here's instructions on how to download that and how to use it. And then here are just the written instructions, the guide to it. Make sure you get the exam completed by Saturday. Exams cannot be submitted late. There's no grace period or extensions on those for lesser points. It is due Saturday at 11:59. If you try to turn it in at 12:01, that is considered late. So make sure you get it in at 11:59.